if you can answer these 4 questions, you're probably going to be pretty successful. And it's, what is our purpose? And there's a whole lot that kind of goes along with that. And how do we add values for our customers, right? And that's probably, you're going to be niched and segmented. And so there's a lot to go into there. And then it's, what's your differentiator? And then how do you prove it all? And that's really, you should be able to communicate that difference and all of those things across your touch points. And I think when you do that well, that's when your audience really connects and resonates with you. And you carry that through to all your design systems and everything else. But you see a lot of these DTC brands, and I can name a ton of them, and they kind of check all those boxes. They've niched down, they're able to communicate, their purpose and how they add value, whether that's monetary or some kind of feature that makes your life easier. And then they're very differentiated, or they're at least differentiated for that niche, and they communicate it well. And it's the exact opposite that a lot of these legacy brands are doing. And that's why I think they're so successful.
Hello and welcome to DTC Podcast. I'm Eric Dick again, and today we're diving deep into the world of high-performance brand packaging with Kevin Smith from SmashBrand. We're going to be discussing some practical tips to help you take the risk out of launching and differentiating your brands, particularly as you attempt to communicate your values and connect with your customers through package design. Now, before we get started, head over to directtoconsumer.co and subscribe. We just reached 8,000 subscribers in our first 2 months, which we're just extremely excited about. And now if you are already subscribed and you like what we're doing, make sure you go and rate us on iTunes, follow us on YouTube, Instagram. Every bit of your attention that you're able to pledge to us helps in our mission to become the top voice in D2C marketing out there. So, and also if you'd like to advertise on a D2C podcast to these 8,000 high-level D2C marketers, make sure you go to directtoconsumer.co/advertise and let's talk turkey. Okay, so D2C is such an exciting space right now. We have so many great ideas converging. The once siloed worlds of product, packaging, marketing, fulfillment, and community are blending together as we realize that each step in the customer experience, when executed properly, casts a halo effect on all the others. This halo effect is what we think separates a lot of the winners from losers in the D2C space. Now, as a marketer, you're ultimately selling the entire customer experience. If a brand's product, packaging, shipping, and unboxing experiences are delightful, the rest of our jobs as a D2C marketer gets that much easier. But as a brand owner, how can you know that your brand experience and packaging are optimal? You can invest tens of thousands of dollars into these projects and come away with not a lot of tangible data to justify your investment. That's why we went out today and got a real expert with Kevin Smith and SmashBrand. So Kevin Smith is the founder and managing partner of SmashBrand. He started as a CPG entrepreneur, growing several of his own CPG brands to over 40 million in revenue. Then he discovered his true passion, brand strategy, and creative direction. So through SmashBrand, he's worked with clients such as Kraft, Heinz, Duracell, 7-Eleven, and PayPal to provide innovative ideas to challenges in packaging design, brand strategy, branding, and customer testing. So hello to Kyle Guilfoyle, my D2C co-host here, as well as SmashBrand. Kevin, how are you doing today?
Fantastic. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, it's just great. Now, before we get started, what's the one thing our audience needs to know about CPG that they might not know?
There's a whole lot. This one was just an interesting fact that I came across just reading the other day, which I didn't realize the scale of it. But these smaller DTC brands that are in CPG have now taken $36 billion in sales away from the nationals that are traditional grocery shoppers, which I thought that's a big number, and nationals are getting nervous.
Nice. They're really starting to take notice there. That I saw similar numbers recently, and it's a super exciting space. What are some of the things that you see that these big players doing, in order to address this? What are some of the things that you see them focusing on? Because I'm so interested in this world coming from the grassroots level up of all these companies that are taking advantage of things, and the big companies, really thinking about this space as well. I'm curious. You seem to have a lot of touch points with a lot of these big companies. What's top of their mind these days, as far as you might understand?
Yeah, it's funny because it's mostly who we work with now are these larger brands, and it didn't start off that way. We always, being a product person, entrepreneur myself, it was always working with smaller challenger brands, and that was our whole portfolio for years and years and years. And I started seeing a shift probably 5 years ago, and it was the first company was Kraft Foods, and they called and said, "Hey, and I won't talk about their projects, but it was, hey, Kool-Aid or coffee, we're kind of, dying from death by 1,000 cuts by these challenger brands. We've been working with the same kind of agencies forever. We're thinking the same way. And so what they wanted was a shift to how can you start to make our company think, which is interesting, right? Like a small business that has three people working there. What can we do? And that was I would say that about 5 years ago. And now I've seen pretty much every larger brand that we work with, they kind of come into that mentality. It's the same problem. They're looking about how they can reach millennial, Gen Z type audiences, and they're, sadly their kind of current market share is getting older, and it's not the primary spender anymore. So they really want to think and understand how kind of these younger brands are doing it.
Very cool. I read a really interesting piece this weekend on the monolithic appearance of a lot of these Gen Z millennial type brands. They were calling them blands, which I thought was really funny, because if you think about it, it's all italics, not italics, it's all serif fonts and pastels, and you can almost see what a modern D2C brand looks like, and it's interesting they're falling under this category. I don't know that it's affecting their success in any way. I think people still really love that sort of image, but I'm curious, how do you approach high-level brand design, and what do you think of this trend of the blands?
My approach actually is a little bit interesting. I think usually people call, and whether it's a startup or it's national, and they say, hey, we need packaging design, we need this. And it usually is a little bit different for me than that. I want to step them back. I think it almost always comes down to differentiation and positioning, right? And for me, there's usually kind of four questions that a brand has to answer. A lot of these younger challenger brands are doing a better job than the nationals answering them. But it really comes down to, if you can answer these four questions, you're probably going to be pretty successful. And it's, what is our purpose? And there's a whole lot that kind of goes along with that. And how do we add values for our customers, right? And that's probably, you're going to be niched and segmented. And so there's a lot to go into there. And then it's, what's your differentiator? And then how do you prove it all? And that's really, you should be able to communicate that difference and all of those things across your touch points. And I think when you do that well, that's when your audience really connects and resonates with you. And you carry that through to all your design systems and everything else. But you see a lot of these DTC brands, and I can name a ton of them, and they kind of check all those boxes. They've niched down, they're able to communicate, their purpose and how they add value, whether that's monetary or some kind of feature that makes your life easier. And then they're very differentiated, or they're at least differentiated for that niche, and they communicate it well. And it's the exact opposite that a lot of these legacy brands are doing. And that's why I think they're so successful.
Yeah, totally. And I imagine that in order to get to that point where you can differentiate, you need to understand the market. And I know that some of the work you do is in market research. And on the SmashBrand website, I noticed you have this really cool diagram that clearly shows what the market wants and how those wants get reflected in your client's packaging. And I'd love to know how you find that stuff out. Like, how do you find out that Duracell, if it loses the copper top, it risks becoming commoditized, or how the ingredients, how fresh ingredients on a package over illustrated ingredients will lead to higher purchase intent, all those kinds of things. Could you tell us a bit about that process and how you find that stuff out?
Yeah, absolutely. I think today we're still if we look back at kind of our story, we're the only that I'm aware of data first brand agency, right? And so when we started this, it wasn't to start an agency. We had our own products that we needed to bring into market and be successful and take away sales from national competitors. And our backgrounds were in computer science. And we know if we were working with Amazon or something, right? And they're changing their homepage or moving a button from the left to the right, we already know how that's going to perform before we actually put it live with users. And so the question was, and my business partner is, hey, if we quit our jobs, why can't we know the same thing on the brand level, right? So that when we have an idea for an innovation or product or a differentiator or whatever it is, I want to know how that's actually going to perform with consumers. And so we didn't really invent this. It's always been there. Market research and testing has been there, but it's been more of a legacy model where you had to hire some really expensive firm, who would do a ton of these really expensive time-consuming focus groups, or you were doing your own research with friends and family. And so it really, it all started off with us building some software, and it allowed us to survey people quickly. And that's how, like with our own brands, it all started. Any of your audience can do this today. You don't need anybody's help. And I can't stress how important it is. But as you have these ideas and you start thinking about like white space and differentiators and communication, is going out there, and even if it's just surveying as your research method, but sending it through to thousands and tens of thousands of users that are not aware of your product yet. And basically you can explain the competitive set and show kind of images of all these competitors that are in your space, and then make up a fake product. And with that kind of fake product, use just the messaging that you want to communicate your differentiators, and start testing it. Do people, in 2 seconds or less, understand those differentiators and eventually when you start surveying like this, and you can just pay pennies for people to go through this survey, you're going to start collecting a whole lot of data, and you're going to aggregate this. You're going to see patterns of certain things that you're doing are working, certain things that you're not doing are probably opportunities. And eventually you're going to get to a place where you're outperforming. And I think I went off a little bit there, but that's kind of for us how it started. Now it's a very sophisticated statistical software that we've built and used when we're developing a brand. But really anybody can use it. And back then it was like a couple college students using surveying to find out what really mattered to the consumer and the audience, where other brands weren't doing that. They were just kind of saying, hey, we're going to have this thing that talks to everybody.
Are you talking about in-person surveying? Are you talking about actually hitting the streets with a piece of paper? It's funny. I worked long ago when I started my career. We were looking for input on different branding things, and we used a service that was then called MTurk, or Mechanical Turk.
Oh my gosh, that's how we started.
Was it really MTurk? That's hilarious.
That's how our whole business started. And it's funny. That's my top secret thing. You can Google Forms and Mechanical Turk. That easy. It's free. And so, yeah, Mechanical Turk is a little secret that nobody ever knows about. And you really do need a researcher that knows a little bit about how to create, unbiased surveying and some methodology, like statistical methodology for relevance. You need a little bit of that. And that was my business partner. But that's what we use. And it's so cheap. I mean, you can put 10,000 people through that and have a bill of $700. I mean, MTurks is amazing. That's how we started our company. Yeah.
That's too funny.
That's awesome. So MTurk is that's where people should go if they want to have a survey.
Anything mechanical done by Turks. No, I don't think it's all Turks, but it's anything that you want, like a simple choice. You just want people, you want input on something. I actually don't even know the whole range of things you can get that service to do, or if it's still around. I think it is.
It's still around. It's huge. It's huge. And colleges use it almost as a #1 source for consumer behavior research now. So you can have any small jobs. They're meant to be jobs that a computer cannot actually do for you. So surveying is a great one of those things, or any kind of research is great, but there's tons of things you can use for it. But yeah, you create a job and you have to build this survey, but you can go out and say, I mean, as simple as, and this is a really bad way to do it, but let's say you're in packaging design, you can say, hey, here's a picture of the shelf. What do you notice first, right? And then you ask that to 500 people on MTurk, and they're getting paid 2 cents. And so now maybe they notice yours, maybe they don't. And then if yours is only getting selected 2% of the time that they're noticing on the shelf, you've got a problem with standout, and you need to rework that. And so that's a very simplified way of using MTurks, and it's not the best. If you were working with a large brand today and told them that you were going to bring in MTurks data, they wouldn't want it because there are some issues with it. But as a startup, for a cheap way to get data and make some choices, it's amazing.
So cool.
Yeah, and I also love it because a lot of the times when we talk about brand strategy, I think that people think that it's this thing that happens in the boardroom. It's stuff like positioning and values and vision. And so to have a way of putting that through a survey and attaching some tangible data to it must be super powerful. I'm curious also, we sort of opened up earlier talking about how, how tools like Shopify make it easier and easier for anybody to have their own store and sell stuff online. And so the importance of differentiation is really paramount. I'm wondering if you have any practical guidance on how a brand can differentiate itself through its packaging and find those greener fields.
Sure. Yeah. And again, I think it's, when I talk to anybody, I think that differentiation is the most important thing. And of course, packaging, it can be, visual kind of brand language differentiation and design. But for me, success always comes from that layer before that, which is like your actual brand strategy level differentiation of your product itself. And I can give maybe an example of something, of even some like process that I think is pretty successful. And so there was a brand that contacted us, and they were a leader in prepaid debit cards. And that market is a very commoditized market where you can't do a lot of innovation. The government really dictates, kind of like banking, of what you can and cannot say. There's not a lot of flexibility to do innovative things there. And they didn't hire us, and they hired another firm that was really good. But about 6 months later, they called us back and said, "Hey, we went to this other firm. We put it back into market, and we lost 35% of sales overnight." For them, that was millions of dollars a day in sales, a huge brand. And so they're like, can you figure out what went wrong? And of course, kind of using research and testing, that same kind of analysis, we were able to find out pretty easily there was a mistake in branding, where before they would always say prepaid Visa very large. So when you're looking at a rack, you would know that's what the product category is and be able to pick it really quick. And they changed that out with the brand name of the company, very large, and that other thing secondary. So it failed because people didn't know what the brand name was, and they were really just looking for what the product category was. But what I told them is that, what we really need to do is we can correct that problem, but to generate, we need to, you do need differentiation. And a good example of that is, so we start testing with consumers. Anybody who's using a prepaid card, we are surveying and finding out why they like it, what's interesting to them about these cards, what they, if they're unbanked, if they're banked, and it all usually comes down to patterns. And so here we start seeing there's a certain percentage of patterns that are happening where people are telling us that they like them because they can't overdraft. And interesting thing about that product category is, of course you can't overdraft. That's not how the cards work. It's not a bank. You put money in it. When you're out of money, you're out of money. And so then we're like, that's interesting that some people like it because you can't overdraft. Let's now take that little pattern that we saw and test it against people that didn't say it, and find out if they like that as an option. And so we're like, hey, would it be interesting to you if there was a prepaid debit card that you could not overdraft on? And everybody said yes. Amazing, right? And the power of that then is when we actually build it into the packaging, right? That brand position of, this is the only prepaid debit card that you cannot overdraft on. What it does is it makes you question every other product in the competitive set. Well, if I buy that card over there, will I have an overdraft fee? It's not telling me yes or no, so I don't know. And that causes sales to go up, instead of down 30%, it go up 110%. And that was finding white space that really didn't matter. When we pitched it back to them, they were like, well, that doesn't make any sense. Of course you can't overdraft. It's not a function of the card, but you're just selling some kind of differentiation that makes you question all the competitors. And in that case, it drove just a ton of sales. And so for me, it comes down to looking at patterns and then kind of exploiting those.
And for anyone who doesn't know, like myself, could you just share what you mean by white space?
Yeah, so just white spaces. If you take, let's say you build a chart, and you can do this with anything, whether it's communication or positioning or vertical channels, but let's say it's positioning, and you take all the competition that's out there, and you start mapping out kind of X and Y over how they are positioned. Eventually, you're going to see areas that nobody's operating in. It's just going to be white on your chart. And that's where the term white space comes from. And the biggest opportunities usually for a brand, especially in these like young DTC brands, like I've always created, are going to be going after something in that white space and owning it.
I like that. We just interviewed Midday Squares, the Montreal company, and they did that exact thing with chocolate and energy bars, and there was no one in the space. Sort of, the sales of chocolate were going through the roof, sales of meal replacement protein bars were going through the roof, but no one had found a successful way to merge like enjoyable chocolate with nutrition, a meal supplement or something like that, and they're really taken off because of that white space idea.
That's white space. Yeah. I mean, they nailed it. They got it, right? They saw those patterns, they put it together. Nobody's operating anybody. They went all in on it. And now that they figured it out, I mean, that's the real power. Packaging is important. And packaging's job really after that is just to communicate that thing that they figured out. It's to make sure the audience gets that and they enjoy the experience. But the real value comes from that white space and figuring that out.
Yeah. So I also love the fact you were talking about the card there. And it's a simple thing, but you were talking about the card and you were talking about the packaging of the card. It's interesting because, we think of packaging as this thing that is the physical paper wrapper on something. But in that case, you're referring it to the entire brand experience, I guess, right? Or the website specifically?
The entire brand experience. This was actually, I know this is more of a direct-to-consumer podcast. This was actually a retail product, like specifically in Walmart and those kind of stores. But I think that even my favorite things with direct-to-consumer are kind of launching it that way, but then end up being omni-channel. And I think there's some pretty big things you can do with the brand where eventually you hit that spot where those retailers are calling you because they want that brand, and you can have some pretty good negotiation points. So then finally kind of merge from DTC into retail. But that's where the packaging, it takes on a different form, right? In direct to consumer, it's more experiential, and you want it to be that they've already been sold on the product. The product doesn't have to sell itself, but now it's about connecting with them, making sure that it's easy to use. I mean, Google does a great job of that when you buy one of their new devices. I mean, my dad has a terrible time with tech products, but if he buys a Google product, it guides him so easily that it's a no-brainer and he gets his Wi-Fi set up. I mean, that's a great experience. But when you go omni-channel and you start to go into retail, packaging has a whole different form where it, basically, it's the only vehicle that can reach 100% of consumers when they're deciding to buy. And, like advertising, it has to put forward the benefits and build brand equity. But when it's done well, it'll convert the sale. And it's pretty much, though, unlike advertising, what requires kind of continuous spending, packaging, that investment grows sales for a long period of time. But that's more in the retail channel.
I think especially if you have, like you want it to, be this long-term investment but you want to have it backed by data. I think there's a lot of entrepreneurs who haven't maybe done a lot of data, you haven't used that process when they've built their product necessarily. And so it's hard to know, unless you have that base of data into what you've done, whether it's optimal. So I think it's just super important that it's something people think about. I was talking about this last podcast I won several months ago. We had talked about any mistakes he might have made, and packaging design was the one that came up for him. Was he had just done a costly redesign, and he liked it, but that was about all he had to go on for the $20K that he spent for the whole, for the redesign. And so I think that's a position that maybe some brand owners find themselves in.
Yeah, it's like today, usually, especially, it's interesting that packaging design, like so many other agency areas of marketing, digital, web, you can do a lot, you can bring in a lot of data to make choices, right? But packaging is one of those ones still where it's pretty legacy. Even some of the greater firms out there, it's just a lot. You're getting, when you hire them, you're still getting pitched on a lot of kind of assumptions and subjectivity. But certainly you can prove out everything from, standout purchase intent, forecasted sales. You can do all of that now with data. And so I encourage, every one of your listeners, as they're going through it, don't get caught in like subjectivity and risk. And even if you're doing it yourself, like bring in data, make those choices, and you'll beat the odds. Even like that big brand of that prepaid card, they didn't bring in data and they lost millions of dollars overnight. And it was a really simple problem that they could have caught quickly.
And well, I'm curious, aside from surveying, could you give our audience maybe some tools or ways they can go about mining that data just quickly? Or?
Sure. Well, surveying is pretty powerful. Like at least when we started out, when you're more on a budget. Now the tools that we have and we've built are really sophisticated, but they're not necessarily simple. Like, right, you're going to have to. For me, I'm going to have somebody there that's mathematician, statistics person that can really get in there and run these tools, especially when you're trying to prove out things like, hey, if I'm deciding on these 4 packaging designs and this is my competitive set, which one of those is going to bring me the highest purchase intent, and then kind of optimizing it so we're guaranteeing that we beat the competition. That's difficult, but surveying is easy, and that's something that anybody in your audience can do. And then pattern matching, right? I think that's one of the simplest things. And I've had a lot of brands that I've owned, even ones that I've started and just thrown on Amazon, where I'll give an example. If it's such a powerful thing for like desk research is Amazon reviews, right? You can go into any product category there. And we were looking at making a product for MCT oil, which is like a keto oil you can take as a diet product. My business partner wanted to make one of those. So we're looking, and we're just taking all those reviews and copying, paste them into Google Docs, right? And looking for patterns of complaints. That was the biggest thing, is we wanted to know what people were complaining about. And when you do that, there's software that you can use to kind of help you find keyword clouds and things like that. We were taking all those reviews and thousands of them across the brands and sticking them into keyword planning tools, which would build out word clouds. They were just free online tools. And it was pretty quickly, we were seeing a big amount of complaint with spillage, right? People were using the bottle, they'd set it down and it would like leave a ring around the countertop, and they were tired of that. So what we did is we just made an MCT oil, and we put one of those olive oil spouts on it that allows it to pour real easily, like a measured pour. And then it's drip proof. And we put it on Amazon, and it was $1 million brand like overnight. And it was just from using a free keyword tool to build word cloud data from Amazon reviews. And I think it's really simple to do that stuff.
And that was the differentiator.
That was the differentiator. That was it.
That was it. That's all you need. Because I guess Amazon is just such a monolithic environment and such a high scale environment. It just takes that one little leverage change, right? In some cases, that's crazy.
Yeah. Doesn't have to be a big difference at all. Like for us, we were at that time, not anymore, but at that time we were the only spill proof MCT oil on the market. It was a good product, but MCT oil is pretty much MCT oil is MCT oil. There's not a lot of differentiation. Yeah. So for us, it was about using packaging to innovate on it just a little bit, but something that really mattered to people. And that's all you need to do these days.
That's really cool. And I think you're speaking, I think your whole, a lot of what you say speaks to this question, but let me know if there's another thing challenger brands should be thinking about, like how, most of our brands, we do have a lot of the big incumbents on our list and in our audience, but most of the people are challenger brands for sure in some stage of that process. So what are some of the ways challenger brands can connect with the hearts and minds of consumers to take market share from these behemoths?
Yeah, it's still, for me, like the phone will ring probably 8 times a day and from challenger brands. And I will take all of those phone calls. And sadly, I already know 9 out of 10 of them are probably not going to make it in the market. It's just what happens. But it goes back to those 4 things that I was talking about. I think, I love challenger brands. I mean, that's so fun to be one and work with them. And, but I would spend all my effort and time and money on really defining those 4 things that I mentioned, which is, your purpose, how you add value to customers, your differentiator, and then like how you prove it, right? Like how across all your touch points can you get all those things across? That to me, over anything else, over investing in packaging and websites, you invest in that foundation. And instead of being a 9 out of 10 brand, you're going to be, you're tripling your odds for sure. It all, I think, comes down to differentiation. Usually the call will go something like this, and I'm sure a lot of your audiences here might be the same way. And so I would challenge them to think about it differently. It's going to be like, hey, I'm this ice cream brand and I'm looking to get into Whole Foods, or I'm selling consumer direct right now. I'm removing some units, but I want to get into Whole Foods. And so I start asking them about, well, what makes you, different from the competitive set out there? And they say, well, we're the most delicious. We're the creamiest. There are these superlatives that you can't compete on those anymore. And so I would challenge any one of those people to think of, like, be the MCT oil, like have something that's some kind of a differentiator that nobody has, because everybody in the ice cream world says they're most delicious.
It's toasted, I keep thinking of, which is what Lucky Strike cigarettes came up with, right? I'm sure it was all toasted, but they were the first to say it, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like that Al Reese and Jack Tro concept of the category of one in their book Positioning. So let's I'm curious about the startup brands and or the startup CPG brands. So they give you a call, and you guys work through those questions. Would you be able to give us a breakdown of the step-by-step process that they could take to successfully bring a new product to market?
The 1 out of 10 that you're able to, that is in it to win it and ready to go. What's the step-by-step process you take them to bring the product to market?
Yeah, it's unfortunate we don't work with the most startups anymore, but I will tell you my method. If I'm having, because we still will start and just put brands out there today for fun or invest in them. And this is kind of the process that I will use. Of course, in the beginning, there's just a lot of desk research. That's secondary research. It can be as simple as I was mentioning, of having researchers that are out there on Amazon looking at that competitive set and reviews, looking for patterns, as well as just industry reports, buying whatever we can there, and then just a whole lot of online and in-store research. I want to break apart every single one of the competitors for how they're positioned, their voice and tone, their communication, their design systems, all of that. And so we want to start mapping it out, right? We would have walls of this research and hundreds of pages of research where we're mapping this out, because everything from the way that their language is created, to their positioning, to their design systems, we want to put all these on kind of white space mapping to see where they're all going to cluster at. Because like you mentioned a minute ago about kind of some of these brands being the same with pastel tones and sans serif fonts and things, they're going to all be clustered over here. And there's different ways to be successful. This is just my belief. I don't want to be over here. I want to be up here somewhere and be different. So that's the first thing. And that's a lot of work that takes weeks to do. But now we're going to come out of that and say, okay, from the positioning, here's all these kind of white space areas we can look at, and from design system, kind of the same thing. And then I want to test this. And so the next step that we would go into is probably on the positioning level, where we're going to have these different themes, and we're going to start to test this positioning against how the other competitors are positioned. And eventually, we're going to find out that we have some bad ideas, some good ideas, and some ways to kind of optimize that. And through this kind of iterative testing, we're going to get to a position in the end that definitely it's capturing a certain percentage that we all agree on of the audience and their spend probably over the competitive set. So now we've got like positioning that works. Next thing that I always like to go into before anything else, before any brand development, is communication. So now we need to communicate that position. And so I want to work on messaging themes. And this is where maybe we have like 5 to 20 different ways to communicate this new positioning. And then what I do, I like to do something called white box testing. And white box testing is where if we have those competitors, and I'll use like an example here. Let's say it was gum. I have some Trident gum here, and we start to build a lot of shelves out. And we have Trident, and we have all these different, and then we have this startup challenger brand of gum. We're just going to put it into a white package with no art, no brand yet, and we're going to use this black text and those words, the communication that we've come up with. We're going to test those against a fully developed brand of Trident, and eventually we're going to get to a place where just the words alone, we're capturing maybe like 10 or 12% of purchase intent over Trident with no design system. Just the right words are doing it. So now we know we've got a foundation. We've got good positioning. We've got the words that are communicating that people do care about. If you put white packaging into the market, it would sell. And then from there, we're going to go into naming. And it's going to be a name that aligns with, again, that positioning. We're going to test that naming for affinity, and affinity testing has been around for a long time. So we're going to run affinity testing and eventually get to the right name that really resonates with consumers. And then after affinity testing, finally, we're going to start pulling together design systems. And that's probably the last bit of testing, where initially we're going to come up with a whole lot of design systems that map back into the white space on the design level white space that's differentiated. And we're going to test those against each other. And some again are going to perform really poorly. Some are going to perform pretty well. There's going to be more insights from that. And eventually we'll get to this kind of hybrid thing that's performing well. And then there's one more set of testing where we take that now, all the communication, the brand name, it all comes into there, and we start testing it against this again, against the final kind of product in the competitive set. And now we should be capturing a high amount of purchase intent from them. A lot of times 30 or 40%. And then we can do sales forecasting and know, like if it's an ice cream company, we can give them the data to walk into Whole Foods and say, hey, when you slot our ice cream now in this section, here's the actual shelf, and here's the data to show that we're going to capture 12% of all the sales, and there's no reason not to bring us in.
Unreal. I think
that's kind of my process.
That's a great process. I think there's a ton of value in there for, the 90% of people who may not be at the stage that they're ready to commit and work with you, but just taking those steps. And this is something we'll probably, unearth in our newsletter, where we'll kind of step out what all these kind of processes are and what you can do at a grassroots level to be testing these things kind of yourself. What it made me think of as you were talking of, one of the things we talk all the time, we're mainly focused on the ad buying side. We're on the marketing side, mainly on that frontline digital marketing side. And so as you're talking about the way you prove out and isolate different elements of success within the, the way you're approaching the customer journey, I feel like that's exactly what we do on the ad buying side as well. We wrote about it a couple of weeks ago. It's called the gold coin testing method, where you're sort of isolating individual elements and then proving them out with different conversion metrics like clicks and things, and then adding them to your stack of proven things. And so my question to you is, like, what interactions do you have with ad buyers, for instance? Like, ad buying there's such a trove of data about product and customer experience that comes from digital advertising. So I'm wondering what your touch points are like with media buying agencies, like someone like Pilot House.
Yeah. So first of all, you're absolutely right. And what it is typically you guys are the ones that inspire us, right? So we're on this legacy model of working on packaging and branding. But like I said in the beginning of this interview, it was really us questioning, well, why can't we do some of those things that these guys do on, digital advertising and media? Because usually the innovation happens there first on some of the testing and being able to prove out these kind of like little micro things. So that's our inspiration, is when we see cool things happening on the marketing side, we try to figure out how we can bring those in here. It's once we've developed that and we start, usually working, because we don't go past activation. That's going to be, with Pilot House, somebody's going to say, hey, our marketing agent, Pilot House, it's our job usually to build those kind of briefs and those guides for implementation. But I'm going to be honest, probably 90% of the time, there's not a lot of interaction after that. We do handoff, maybe a few meetings, and there's just usually not a lot of collaboration after that. I think that there could be, and I don't have an answer to why there's not.
I think we can forge it. I think, as we go, if you ever get a client that's looking for someone on that front end of iteration, bring us in and we can partner up on a full funnel performance experience.
Yeah. I mean, it was just today. I mean, I got off the phone with a huge brand and they sent an RFP in, and of course they wanted the kind of the brand development stuff. But in that same RFP was all the way through marketing, activation, media buying. And I'm like, well, we don't do these things. I'm like, is that a problem? I'm a big believer. And I've hired, with my own brands, we started off poor, like no money on our first company. But after that, we were like, hey, let's hire some good agencies. Like we hired, people that have created, some of the biggest energy drinks around. And I will say that I always found it that the ones that claim to do everything seemed to be quite mediocre at everything. But it was the ones that really had expertise, where, their expertise at branding or expertise in kind of marketing, activation, media buying. That's where I always found the most value. But the firms that were like, hey, we do packaging and SEO and media buying and all these things, it was pretty trash.
Yeah, totally. That's, we're a specialized media agency, and we're very interested. We're constantly engaging a lot of these bigger brands and interested in the way we might fit into that ecosystem. But anyway, we are running out of time here. We're going to wrap this up in a little bit. We're actually going to jump into a subscriber section in a minute, where we're going to ask a bunch of questions. We sent an email out to our audience, and we got like dozens and dozens of great questions in. We're going to pick some of those best questions and answer them with Kevin. We're going to then put those out in the newsletter and in the subscription tier. So if you want the answer to those questions, you got to go to directconsumer.co right now and subscribe to the newsletter. And then let's just before we jump in there, let's talk about one of the things that you're most interested in these days is something you brought up with us in conversation about what your focus is in this space in terms of acquisitions.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what interests me the most these days isn't even gaining new clients or anything like that. It's really we've been doing a lot of investing in brands that we think are going to be winners. And so I am always interested in talking with brands that probably aren't, for me, kind of the criteria isn't somebody who's just looking for a cash investment, but they're looking for more of a partnership where we can bring in that expertise and do cash investment plus be able to guide kind of that process that I talked about in the beginning, where we've had just a lot of success where we're working with brands where we can bring them through that, even help with some of the, the right channel opportunities, and then come out, really successful on the other end. But that's what interests me quite a bit, is investment, but with brand involvement.
Very cool. So how can people get in touch with you if they're interested in giving you a pitch on their brand?
Absolutely. Kevin at SmashBrand.com. That's the best way, and we'll set something up.
Nice. That's fantastic. Oh, cool. Well, thank you, everyone. Any final words there, KG?
No, Kevin, this has been awesome. I think I'm
we're
good.
ready to go into the subscriber only section. Well, anyways, thank you for listening, everyone. That'll be the end of the regular podcast. We'll be back next week. We've actually have 3 podcasts this week. We're going to be dripping them out over the next couple weeks. We're really excited for what's happening. And we're very excited for who's going to be our 10,000 subscribers. So it could be, if you're listening and you haven't subscribed yet, make sure you subscribe. You could be that lucky number 10,000. We may or may not have something special for you. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you guys next week.
I want to give a shout out to our sponsor, Gorgias. Gorgias is the e-commerce help desk that turns your customer service into a profit center. So if you need help scaling customer service this upcoming holiday season, don't hire extra staff. Try Gorgias. They get more done with less thanks to automation and machine learning. And D2C listeners get their second month free by speaking with the Gorgias team today. Just go to dtcnews.link/Gorgias.